Hello, welcome to the first lecture of Forces of Society. As I've already mentioned in the introduction, I will be running through each one of the layers of different emergent systems that lead us to the emergence of cultural systems, which is what we're interested in. I will start off today with the first three layers of emergence. They're very well known about and explored. They also exist in the microcosm. The way this works is, in the way that the world builds and how we will explore every emergent system is, we will have elementary particles here, and when there's a bunch of elementary particles that gather together, they will create a particle. And then if those particles gather together into a bigger one, that's what we'll call an element. What we have examined is and found is that there's elements which create our entire existence here. Elements also come with electrons within them that jump around much more than elements can. So elements are pretty wired into their place wherever they are. I'm sure air molecules can fly around, but by and large the atom is defined, whereas electrons can actually move around much more easier, which creates very interesting effects within the existence of living systems and cultural systems as things get built up out of this whole system. I want to zoom in to show these particular ones. So we've got elementary particles, quarks. They create composite particles. Protons and neutrons are the most common ones, or the ones that basically build all of our elements. The seven most predominant elements that build our entire existence of biological systems are what's called SNOPs elements, which is hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, calcium, and sulfur. And of course there's trace minerals that I could add up in here that are just not as popular, but the idea is to recognize the layer of all the predominant and largest in the context of expression. If you remember the bell curve that I showed in the first introduction video, these seven elements are all within, when you look at all the elements that are involved in life, are within the first standard deviation. So they're very important to look at how they behave and what they do in order to understand biological systems, which is what biochemistry does. What builds off of these elements, as we all know, are molecules. Now, how do we understand molecules and how do we classify molecules in order to isolate what living systems are? Well, first of all, we have to recognize that there's same atom molecules. There's compounds, which are molecules that contain not just one element at a time, but multiple elements. Those are the compounds. Then we have functional groups. Now, what's interesting about the world, so the functional groups and monomers as they build, is that they literally create living systems, but they are not built by biochemical systems. They actually naturally occur. But without them, life would never exist. So basically, both functional groups and monomers are compounds. They're very specific compounds that are involved in life. And as it happens, functional groups quite literally build monomers. So monomers are collections of a few functional groups, which makes them very similar in nature. They're very close to each other. They create themselves very naturally in, well, at least the living or the chemical conditions within Earth. Basically, functional groups and monomers are preconditioned for there to be life. And if Earth had conditions to create functional groups and monomers naturally, and then life emerged out of them, then technically Earth created life, mainly because it could have the conditions to create life. And then from those, we have specific monomers or polymers, if monomers start lining up themselves, in which case we have three very important domains. Just like we have domains of expression of elements of different kinds, we have three specific expressions of molecules that are literally life to a large standard deviation degree, because genes, proteins, and the epigenetic tags that are attached to them quite literally are life. But when they're looked on their own, they're non-living. That's why they're in the category of molecules. And earlier when I looked at this bigger diagram here, right here, I didn't include them in life, which would have been the living systems, which only happens once there's actual molecular networks in place, and then there's going to be cells, because molecular networks are also, by and large, created, as we'll see soon, naturally as well. So in this case, we classify these molecules as just regular non-living molecules, even though they exist very much so in living systems. And again, the reason why they're here to remind is also because viruses are quite literally made out of exactly these same molecules. And then the next level, which is the fifth level, is our level of molecular networks, of which there's of course non-biochemical and biochemical. So molecular networks, just like we were looking earlier about how specific entities can create a larger entity, in this case, a specific group of molecules, so if we were to imagine this molecule, will move around, influence another molecule, and then come back to that same replicative cycle. And the important part is that it's a perpetual replicated cycle. So molecular networks are things that happen all the time. They're not something that sometimes or never happens. They're very involved, at least the ones that we're exploring here. So the main two ones are physical reactions, which is when the composition of a specific molecule doesn't change when they interact and run a cycle of sorts. And then there's chemical reactions, in which case the composition of the molecules actually changes. Okay? Now, from there on, we have organic reactions. We've got driver reactions. Now, organic reactions are any reaction that involves organic molecules, which is the molecules that belong in the world of life. But an organic reaction doesn't have to be in a life. You can have organic molecules in a petri dish running a chemical reaction, and it's not biochemical, but it's organic because it uses organic molecules. And those kinds of organic reactions would have been ever present in the early primordial days of life on Earth, mainly through the mixing of functional groups and monomers. And in the process, creating genes and proteins that also mix around, because those are organic. All of those are organic compounds that, as molecules, interact within a context of an organic reaction in a primordial soup of the early Earth. But it's driver reactions that actually created life. And that's the distinction between an organic reaction and an actual driver reaction, because a driver reaction is a reaction that is actually going to go in the direction of having life. So it's technically life. Just again, you could have, say, a whole lot of viruses on their own, creating entities that are very, very lifelike in the way how they replicate everything that living systems replicate. I will wrap up today's lecture by finishing the world of matter and the fifth level of emergence, and in the next lecture I will be exploring the world of living systems in order to choose the types of living system that we want to be focused on in order to find where cultural systems are, because this is sort of a quest of climbing up the tree to see where the cultural systems are. Because another misconception is that culture is something that is only within humans. It's very strongly expressed in humans. However, there's many other animals and animal systems that express very straightforward cultural expressions and cultural systems. And we'll cover all of those in the upcoming videos. Thank you, and see you in the next one.